The hungry dragon. The cherry-red berry tumbled from pale fingers toward tiny, expectant jaws. Maggie Weaver never expected to be late for work because of a dragon. The creature, no larger than a terrier, peered up with intelligent eyes that reflected the neon shop signs. Its scales glittered like polished hematite in the morning light, and amber wings tucked neatly against its sinewy body twitched with anticipation. The miniature dragon's snout extended cautiously, nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of her raspberry muffin. "You're hungry, aren't you?" Maggie whispered, breaking off another piece. She was 28, dressed in her standard office attire, a comfortable white blouse and blue jeans that her boss tolerated because technically her job description included occasional fieldwork. Her sturdy brown boots had seen better days, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, a few strands escaping to frame her face. As she crouched lower, the dragon's tongue flicked out, snatching the morsel with surprising gentleness. Maggie had never seen anything like it outside of special effects in movies, yet here it was, a living, breathing impossibility warming the pavement of Meridian Avenue. "I don't suppose you have an owner?" she asked, knowing full well the absurdity of expecting an answer. The dragon tilted its head, reptilian features somehow conveying an expression that might have been melancholy in a human face. It made a soft chirping sound, almost like a question. The creature's appearance alone should have terrified her, sent her running for the authorities or at least grabbing for her phone to document this biological impossibility. Instead, she found herself breaking off another piece of her breakfast. "I'm going to be in so much trouble," she muttered, checking her watch. The Interdimensional Research and Prevention Service would not accept feeding a dragon as a valid excuse for tardiness, especially when she was already on thin ice after the incident with the experimental gravitational inverter. 18 coffee mugs had been lost to the ceiling that day. The dragon finished the last bite and, to Maggie's surprise, performed what could only be described as a little bow. Its 4 legs extended forward as its head dipped graciously. Then it turned and scampered away down an alley, disappearing into the shadows between buildings. Maggie stood, brushing crumbs from her hands, wondering if she had imagined the entire encounter. But the lingering smell of something like cinnamon and ozone where the dragon had been suggested otherwise. She hurried toward the subway entrance, unaware that her random act of kindness had just activated an ancient interdimensional protocol that had been dormant for 723 years. In a dimension approximately 3.5 quantum rotations sideways from our own, an alarm began to sound. Dimensional disturbances. Weaver. My office. Now. Director Pendleton's voice carried across the research floor like a sonic boom, causing several junior researchers to fumble their calibrators. The aging bureaucrat had mastered the art of making his thinning gray hair seem perpetually electrified with indignation, and today was no exception. Maggie sighed, setting down the dimensional stability monitor she'd been recalibrating. "Coming, sir," she called, shooting an apologetic glance at her colleague Raj. "Feeding dragons again?" Raj whispered with a smirk, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Very funny," she muttered, though the memory of the morning's encounter sent a little shiver down her spine. "Cover for me if the location anomaly detector starts beeping." "Always do," he replied, already turning his attention to the device's fluctuating readout. Director Pendleton's office was a shrine to outdated technology and government inefficiency. Stacks of paper reports towered precariously beside a computer that might have been cutting edge during the Clinton administration. The man himself sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, mustache twitching like an agitated caterpillar. "You're late, Weaver," he announced as if this were breaking news. "Sorry, sir. There was an unusual transit delay." "Technically not a lie." He shuffled papers importantly. "Are you aware that we've detected six unauthorized dimensional disturbances in the last 24 hours? Maggie frowned. "No, sir. The monitors showed normal activity when I checked them this morning. That's because they were localized, pinpoint breaches." He stabbed a finger at a map spread across his desk. "And do you know what's particularly interesting about these disturbances?" She had a feeling she wasn't going to like the answer. What, sir? They all occurred within a 2-block radius of your apartment building. A cold sensation settled in Maggie's stomach, right next to the remaining half of the raspberry muffin she'd managed to salvage from her dragon encounter. That's probably a coincidence, she offered weakly. Coincidence? Pendleton's eyebrows shot up like startled caterpillars. In this agency? Have you learned nothing in your 3 years here? There are no coincidences, Weaver. Only undocumented causalities. He slid a form across the desk. It was printed on pale blue paper that seemed to shimmer slightly under the fluorescent lights. The governmental seal at the top depicted an eagle clutching what appeared to be a Klein bottle in one talon and a protractor in the other. Form ID 732-9B, Self-Report of Potential Dimensional Interference Activities. I want this filled out in triplicate by end of day, Pendleton declared. If you've brought some interdimensional nonsense home with you, I need to know before it turns into another Hoboken situation. Everyone at IRPS knew about the Hoboken situation. 3 years ago, a junior researcher had accidentally carried home dimensional residue on his shoelaces. 2 days later, half of Hoboken had temporarily phased 6 inches to the left, causing thousands of stubbed toes and one very confused mail carrier who found himself delivering letters in what was technically an alternate version of New Jersey. The paperwork had been nightmarish. I haven't brought anything home, Maggie insisted, though the image of the small dragon flickered through her mind. But I'll complete the form. See that you do. Pendleton waved dismissively. And Weaver? No more detours on your way to work. This agency runs on punctuality and properly documented dimensional anomalies. As Maggie left the office, form in hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was setting her up for something. It wouldn't be the first time. Her grandmother had always said that Maggie had a knack for finding trouble, or rather, that trouble had a knack for finding her. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine monitoring and calibration, though Maggie couldn't stop thinking about the dragon. By the time she boarded the subway home, she had nearly convinced herself that it had been a hallucination brought on by too much late-night research and not enough sleep. That conviction lasted right until she unlocked her apartment door. The portal opens. Oh, fudgesicles, Maggie whispered, dropping her keys with a clatter. A perfectly circular, gently pulsating disk of light hovered 3 feet off the ground in the middle of her living room. The portal, because what else could it be, rippled like water disturbed by a stone. It was about 4 feet in diameter, its edges shimmering with a blue-gold luminescence that cast dancing patterns across her walls. Through its center, Maggie could see what appeared to be a vast library stretching impossibly far, with shelves that curved and bent in ways that suggested either brilliant architecture or a complete disregard for Euclidean geometry. She should call it in immediately. There was a procedure for this. Step 1, secure the area. Step 2, contact IRPS emergency response. Step 3, do not under any circumstances interact with the anomaly. Instead, Maggie found herself taking a cautious step forward, curiosity overriding protocol. The air around the portal smelled familiar, cinnamon and ozone, just like where the dragon had been. Hello, she called tentatively. Is anyone there? A sudden movement on the other side caught her attention. A figure emerged from between distant bookshelves, growing larger as it approached the portal from the other side. Maggie backed up hastily, grabbing the nearest potential weapon, a particularly pointy umbrella she'd forgotten to take to work despite the morning forecast of 85% chance of interdimensional precipitation. The figure came into focus, and Maggie's jaw dropped. It was a man, or at least man-shaped, dressed in what appeared to be a librarian's outfit as designed by someone who had only had library dress codes described to them verbally by a time traveler with poor memory. His white hair stuck out at odd angles, and tiny spectacles perched on a nose that seemed slightly too long for his face. Ah, he exclaimed, stopping just short of the portal's threshold. The kindness protocol has been activated. Fascinating. I wasn't entirely certain it would work after all these centuries. His voice carried a slight accent that Maggie couldn't place, as if English were his second language, but his first language didn't exist in any dimension she knew of. "I'm sorry, the what protocol?" Maggie asked, lowering her umbrella slightly but keeping it ready. "The kindness protocol, my dear. Ancient interdimensional law, established by the Treaty of Harmonious Coexistence in the year, well, the year doesn't translate properly to your calendar system, but let's say it was a very long time ago." He adjusted his spectacles. "When a being from one dimension shows unprovoked kindness to a being from another dimension, it creates a resonance cascade that opens communication channels between worlds." Maggie blinked. "Are you saying that because I fed that little dragon this morning, I've opened a portal to another dimension?" "Precisely. Though I must say, your dimensional signature is quite remarkable. Most beings can barely manage a temporary flicker when they activate the protocol. You've maintained a stable portal for—" He consulted what appeared to be a pocket watch made of crystallized light, "nearly 6 hours now. Quite impressive for someone untrained." "Untrained in what, exactly?" "Interdimensional resonance manipulation, naturally. Though I suspect you come by it honestly. Your grandmother had quite the reputation in certain circles." He smiled warmly. "I am Keeper Aldrich of the Infinite Library. I've been waiting a very long time to meet a member of the Weaver family." Maggie's hand instinctively went to the strange pendant her grandmother had left her, the one that looked like a compass crossed with an astrolabe. As she touched it, the needle began spinning faster, and she could swear she heard a faint humming sound. "My grandmother?" she asked. But she collected teapots and talked to her plants. Keeper Aldrich chuckled. "Oh, my dear girl. Margaret Weaver was many things, but just anything was not one of them. She was one of the most gifted dimensional facilitators in 17 different realities. Why do you think you ended up working for IRPS? Coincidence?" The word echoed in Maggie's mind, along with Pendleton's earlier assertion that there were no coincidences in their line of work. "What do you want from me?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Keeper Aldrich's expression grew serious. "There's trouble brewing, Miss Weaver. The barriers between dimensions are weakening, and not in the controlled, beneficial way that the kindness protocol allows. Something is deliberately damaging the interdimensional framework, and if we don't stop it soon, the cascade failure will destroy countless worlds." He paused, studying her face. "We need your help. The question is, are you willing to step through that portal and discover what your grandmother always knew you were destined to become?" Maggie looked at the shimmering gateway, then at the pendant in her hand, then back at the earnest face of the interdimensional librarian waiting on the other side. Her phone buzzed. A text from Raj: "Anomaly detectors going crazy. Pendleton's having a meltdown. Where are you?" She had a choice to make. Interdimensional meeting. Maggie took a deep breath and stepped through the portal. The sensation was like walking through warm honey that somehow didn't stick to her clothes. For a moment, she existed in both dimensions simultaneously, seeing her apartment overlaid with the impossible library. Then reality snapped into focus, and she found herself standing among towering shelves that stretched beyond the limits of perception. "Welcome to the Infinite Library," Keeper Aldrich said, gesturing expansively. "Repository of knowledge from across all known dimensions. Your grandmother spent many pleasant hours here, you know." Maggie spun slowly, taking in the impossible architecture. Books floated gently through the air, shelving themselves according to some system she couldn't fathom. Ladders extended into misty heights, and she could see other figures, definitely not human, browsing the collections on distant levels. "This is incredible," she breathed. "But you said there was trouble." "Indeed." Aldrich led her down a corridor lined with what appeared to be crystalline data storage devices. "Follow me. The council is waiting." They emerged into a circular chamber where beings from various dimensions had gathered around a table that seemed to be made of solidified starlight. Maggie recognized none of the species present, though one creature that resembled a cross between an owl and a praying mantis nodded at her in what she hoped was a friendly manner. "Friends," Aldrich announced, "may I present Maggie Weaver, granddaughter of Margaret the bridge builder. A collective murmur went around the table. The owl mantis being spoke in a voice like wind chimes, the resonant signature is unmistakable. She carries the Weaver gift. What gift? Maggie asked, feeling overwhelmed. A being that looked like it was made of living water answered, the ability to strengthen the bonds between dimensions, child. Your grandmother helped establish the peace treaties that have kept our worlds in harmony for decades. Without her work, the barriers between realities would have collapsed long ago. Keeper Aldrich pulled out a chair for Maggie. As she sat, her grandmother's pendant grew warm against her chest. The dragon you fed this morning, he said, was a scout from the fourth spiral. They've been monitoring the dimensional weak points, and what they've found is troubling. The table's surface suddenly displayed a three-dimensional map of interconnected realities, with pulsing red areas indicating disturbances. Maggie gasped, the pattern was spreading like an infection across multiple dimensions. Someone is deliberately weakening the barriers, said a crystalline being whose voice sounded like breaking glass. Not to facilitate communication like the kindness protocol, but to merge realities forcibly. The dimensional collisions would be catastrophic. Who would do such a thing? Maggie asked. The water being rippled with what might have been anxiety. We believe it's a rogue faction from the shadow dimension, beings who seek to consume other realities to expand their own power. They've been testing weak points, probing for vulnerabilities. Keeper Aldrich leaned forward. Your world, Miss Weaver, sits at a crucial nexus point. If they can destabilize Earth's dimensional boundaries, they can trigger a cascade that will make all realities vulnerable to invasion. Maggie felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. What can I do? I don't know anything about interdimensional, anything. I just calibrate monitoring equipment. Ah, but you do know, the owl mantis being said. The knowledge is in your blood, your bones. Your grandmother saw to that. The pendant you wear isn't just jewelry, it's a dimensional anchor, keyed to your family's genetic signature. As if responding to its mention, the pendant pulsed with warm light. Suddenly, Maggie could see the dimensional map more clearly. She could sense the weak points, feel the wrongness where the barriers had been damaged. I can feel them, she whispered. The broken places. They hurt. Yes, Aldrich said gently. That's the Weaver gift, you can sense dimensional health and, more importantly, you can repair it. But we must act quickly. The shadow dimension forces are preparing for a major assault. They plan to strike at the nexus points simultaneously, tomorrow at dawn. Maggie stood, her mind racing. Tomorrow. But that's when IRPS runs their weekly system diagnostics. All our defensive monitors will be cycling offline for maintenance. The beings around the table exchanged alarmed looks. That's not a coincidence, the crystalline being chimed ominously. They have inside knowledge of your world's vulnerabilities. Someone at IRPS is working with them, Maggie realized, pieces falling into place. The disturbances near my apartment, they weren't random. Someone was monitoring me, watching to see if I'd activate the kindness protocol. Keeper Aldrich nodded grimly. Which means they know about your abilities now. You're in danger in your own dimension, but you're also our only hope of stopping them. Maggie looked around the table at the expectant faces of beings from across the cosmos. Her quiet life of monitoring equipment and filing reports seemed very far away. Tell me what I need to do, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. The owl mantis being spread what might have been wings. First, you must return to your world and warn your colleagues. Then, you must learn to use your gifts to repair the dimensional damage before the shadow forces can exploit it. And if I can't? Keeper Aldrich's expression was grave. Then reality as we know it ends, and all our worlds become feeding grounds for entities that exist only to consume and expand. Maggie touched her grandmother's pendant, feeling its warm pulse of encouragement. No pressure, she muttered. But deep inside, she felt something awakening, a power she'd never known she possessed, and the determination to use it to protect everything she held dear. The final choice. The portal back to her apartment felt different this time, more stable, responding to her intentions rather than simply existing. As Maggie stepped through, she noticed she could sense the dimensional fabric around her, feeling its health like a pulse in her bones. Her phone was buzzing incessantly. 17 missed calls from Raj, 12 from IRPS emergency response, and 1 from Director Pendleton that simply said, "Office. Now." But Maggie had more important things to worry about. The pendant had taught her how to see dimensional weak points, and her apartment was riddled with them, tiny fractures in reality that someone had been carefully creating, preparing for tomorrow's assault. She spent the next hour moving through her building, touching each fracture with her fingertips and willing them to heal. The process was exhausting but intuitive, like mending tears in fabric that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Each repair sent waves of warmth through the pendant, confirming she was on the right path. Her phone rang again. "Raj. Maggie. Where have you been?" "Pendleton's gone completely mental. He's locked down the building and activated some kind of emergency protocol I've never seen before." "Raj," she said carefully, "how long have you known Pendleton?" "What?" "About 3 years, same as you." "Why?" "And before IRPS?" "What did he do before?" I don't actually know. His personnel file is classified above my clearance." "Maggie, what's going on?" The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Pendleton's knowledge of the disturbances, his immediate suspicion of her, the convenient timing of tomorrow's diagnostic shutdown. He hadn't been investigating dimensional breaches, he'd been creating them. "Raj, listen to me very carefully. Don't go back to the office tonight. Something's wrong with Pendleton." "What are you talking about?" "I can't explain over the phone, but you have to trust me. Stay away from IRPS until I can figure this out." She hung up and checked her watch. 4 hours until dawn. 4 hours to stop an interdimensional invasion with only her newly awakened abilities and the help of beings from other dimensions. The portal in her living room shimmered, and Keeper Aldrich stepped through, followed by the small dragon from the morning. In the library's light, she could see it properly, scales that shifted color with its emotions, intelligent eyes full of ancient wisdom despite its small size. "This is Ember," Aldrich said. "He's been monitoring your dimension for months, tracking the shadow dimension's preparations. When he saw you this morning, he knew it was time to activate the kindness protocol." Ember chirped and nuzzled against Maggie's hand. She could feel his gratitude, his worry, and his fierce determination to protect her world. "We've located the primary breach point," Aldrich continued. "It's directly beneath your government building. Pendleton has been using IRPS equipment to weaken the barriers from the inside. Can we stop it? We have to try. But it will require you to use your abilities at full strength, and there's no telling what that might cost you." Maggie nodded, understanding. Some prices were worth paying. They traveled through a network of interdimensional passages that Ember navigated with ease, emerging in the sub-basement of the IRPS building. The air here thrummed with wrongness, reality was thin, twisted, barely holding together. At the center of the room, Director Pendleton stood before a massive breach in the dimensional wall. Through it, Maggie could see shapes moving in the darkness, things that hurt to look at directly. "Ah, Miss Weaver," Pendleton said without turning around. His voice sounded different now, layered with harmonics that suggested something else was speaking through him. "Right on time. I must thank you for making this so much easier. Your little display of kindness activated protocols we've been trying to trigger for years." "Why?" Maggie asked, stepping forward despite her fear. "Why destroy everything?" "Destroy?" Pendleton laughed, and the sound made the damaged reality around them ripple. "We're not destroying anything. We're consuming, integrating, making everything part of something greater. Your dimension will become part of ours, and in return, we'll grant it the gift of eternal existence within our realm." As your slaves, Aldrich said coldly. As our components, Pendleton corrected. Every reality we've absorbed has made us stronger, more complete. Earth will be just another addition to our collection. The shadow shapes beyond the breach were pressing closer, testing the barriers. Maggie could feel the dimensional fabric straining, about to tear completely. She closed her eyes and reached out with her grandmother's gift, feeling for the pattern of reality, the way dimensions were meant to connect and support each other. The shadow dimension's touch was like acid on the universal structure, dissolving the bonds that kept worlds separate and stable. You can't stop us, Pendleton said. The process has already begun. Maybe, Maggie replied, opening her eyes. But I can fix what you've broken. She pressed her hands against the nearest wall and let her power flow out, not just to repair the local damage, but to strengthen the entire dimensional framework around Earth. The pendant blazed with light, and she felt her grandmother's presence, guiding her, showing her how to weave reality back together. The shadow entities shrieked as their access points began to seal. Pendleton spun around, his face contorting with inhuman rage, but Ember was ready. The little dragon breathed a stream of golden fire that didn't burn flesh but seemed to drive something dark and writhing out of Pendleton's body. The director collapsed, unconscious but breathing normally. Is it over? Maggie asked, swaying with exhaustion. Keeper Aldrich was checking the dimensional readings on a device that looked like a cross between a compass and a kaleidoscope. The immediate threat, yes. You've sealed the primary breach and reinforced the barriers. It will take the shadow dimension centuries to find another way through. And Pendleton? He was controlled, not corrupted. He'll recover, though he won't remember any of this. Aldrich smiled. The Council has agreed to assign a permanent liaison to your world, someone to watch for future incursions and help train others who might carry the Weaver gift. Ember chirped hopefully, looking up at Maggie with bright eyes. I think, Aldrich said with a grin, he's volunteering for the position. 3 months later, Maggie sat in her office at IRPS, filing her daily reports. Officially, there had been a gas leak in the sub-basement that had caused hallucinations and temporary amnesia. Director Pendleton had been transferred to a desk job in accounting, where he seemed much happier. On her desk, a small terrarium housed what everyone assumed was an exotic lizard. Ember basked under a heat lamp, occasionally opening one eye to check the dimensional monitoring equipment that now registered as completely normal. Raj knocked on her cubicle wall. Everything quiet today? Absolutely, Maggie said, scratching Ember behind his tiny ears. No dimensional disturbances, no interdimensional incidents, just a perfectly ordinary day at the office. Ember made a soft sound that might have been laughter. That evening, as Maggie walked home, she noticed a young boy feeding breadcrumbs to what appeared to be a small, winged cat in the park. The creature's fur shimmered with impossible colors, and its eyes held depths that suggested intelligence beyond its apparent species. Maggie smiled and continued walking. The kindness protocol was working exactly as intended, creating bridges between worlds, one small act of compassion at a time. In her apartment, the space where the portal had been now held a simple mirror. But sometimes, if she looked at it just right, she could see the infinite library beyond, and Keeper Aldrich waving from his desk among the floating books. The dimensional barriers were strong now, but permeable in all the right ways. Earth was no longer isolated but part of a greater community of worlds, protected not by walls but by the connections between beings who chose kindness over fear. Ember curled up on her shoulder as she made dinner, purring contentedly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to strengthen the bonds between dimensions, new chances to prove that sometimes the most powerful force in any universe is simply caring about others. Outside her window, the city hummed with life, unaware that their world was now part of something infinitely larger and more wonderful than they had ever imagined. And in dimensions beyond counting, beings who had once been strangers now called Earth their friend. The end.